Check me out. Two things crossed my mind as the police officer pointed his pistol at me and yelled for me to get down on my knees and put my hands on top of my head. Number one, I would never get used to a police officer pointing a gun at me, even after all these years. And number two, once he removed my pistol from my waistband and my shirt, I was going back to prison again. Ex-con in possession of a firearm, 2 years guaranteed. What I didn't know at the time was that my neighbor had been murdered, and at that very moment I was their number one suspect for the crime. And you know, I knew my life as a criminal was almost over, but I sure didn't think this was how it was going to end. It all started a long time ago on a very different note. I was raised in a good home with a loving mother and father. I excelled in sports and I fit in with my peers real good socially. Things were different back then, but I also had some dark secrets as a child. For years I had been sexually molested at a preschool daycare, and I didn't know a lot about that then, but I knew it was wrong. And there was a sense of guilt and shame that I felt that I couldn't really process in my mind, at least back then. Anyways, I got older and the feelings turned into anger, and I acted out with violence and rage. By high school, I was smoking weed, drinking, doing strong-arm robberies, and selling LSD. My freshman year, I was kicked out of the school district for a physical fight with a teacher in class. From there, it was boarding school, where I swallowed enough pills to OD in an attempt to get high. After they rushed me to the hospital, pumped my stomach, and put me on heart monitors, I was expelled and sent home. My parents put me in a locked-up rehab center, but I refused to do the program. I would again have fits of rage, attack adults, and they would lock me in my first cell out of many to come. And when that didn't work, they would strap leather straps around my body, my arms, and my legs, and leave me fastened to a stretcher-like bed until my energy was used up and gone. Finally, it was determined that rehab wasn't going to work and I was released. It wasn't long before my life really began to change. I met some older guys who were pimps, and they had stable of girls they used as prostitutes. And I thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do with my life. So I did. Under their teaching and guidance, I dropped out of school for good and learned how to walk, talk, and act like a pimp. I left home and took the young girls I had talked into this lifestyle with me. I moved to California and put them on the street to work. It was at this time that I began a decade-long relationship with the Reno area brothels and began to send girls on trips one state over for weeks at a time. Then, one day I was visiting Oregon back home, drunk as usual, when one of my girls had a date with a customer who didn't pay. When I found out about this, I grabbed a rusty old hatchet and went to the man's house. When he wasn't there, I went to his friend's house and began to chop and strike the man with the axe. Soon the cops arrived and I was arrested. So for the next year and a half or so, I would continue to fight and act out aggressively, but I would do it from McLaren, the state of Oregon's maximum security lockup for boys. Check me out. We called the lifestyle I was in the game. And there's a saying, be true to the game and the game will be true to you. Knowing what I know now, a better way to say that would be true to the devil and he'll fool you with all kinds of fancy worldly things and confuse you into thinking you've been rewarded for doing evil. Truthfully, of course, he's killing you. And that's exactly what was happening in my life. I returned home from McLaren. 2 of my close friends were dead. 1 murdered, 1 suicide. And those who were still there and not locked up themselves were hustling real hard. So I hit the streets to hustle again. I sold methamphetamines and I spent most of my waking hours drunk. With this came more violence and arrests, drunk driving, possession of a machine gun. Then finally I was arrested for a knife fight with a nightclub bouncer and I was headed for the state prison. After serving my time in the penitentiary, I was paroled back home from Pendleton and I jumped headfirst back into a life of promoting prostitution. I started making a lot of money. I bought cars, Rolex watches, anything I wanted, I bought. And at that point I thought, well, the devil isn't so bad. The more evil I did, the more money would come pouring in. After a scuffle with some Hells Angels bikers one night, a friend and I jumped into his new sports car and headed through Reno towards the Mustang Ranch to meet with some of our girls and pick up some money. We were going over 110 miles an hour when I glanced over at the speedometer at about the same time we began to spin out of control. When we hit the guardrail, we flipped in the air a few times and landed upside down quite a ways from the freeway. I was knocked unconscious and came to in the ambulance. They used the jaws of life to rip the car in two. Then they rushed us to the hospital to pull metal and glass from our heads and stitch us back up. But I still live with the death wish, and I had no intention of living past my 20s. So I went right back to the streets. I wasn't getting the hard lessons. I continued to exploit women in the sex industry, drink, and go in and out of various county jails for assaults. One night, I was in a fight that left me bleeding to death with the left half of my face ripped off. I could see in the mirror that my teeth were showing through a large hole in my cheek as I bled. The surgeons worked all night and put my face back together with over 180 stitches. My arm was also broken in 2 places during that particular fight. Weeks later, I was in a bar when I saw an old friend of mine who had told on another friend of mine, sending him to prison for a drive-by murder that he had witnessed. Because I considered him a snitch, I attacked him and was again fighting in the bar, this time with a cast on one arm and a face full of stitches. During this period of time, another friend of mine was murdered over a pound of weed. 2 other friends of mine also committed murder themselves. One night I was with a friend of mine, Travis, standing in front of a bar. I gave him a quick hug and told him meet us at the strip club down the road. Instead, he went the other way and ended up shooting 2 men in their head. He is now on death row awaiting execution for 2 counts of aggravated murder. The more messy my life got, the harder my heart became as well. I visited my parents here in Bend one day, and as usual with them, we ended up sitting in church at Westside. I really hated that. Church made my blood pressure go through the roof. Pastor Ken's messages would irritate me to no end. I was just so angry, but I was also tired and burnt out. After service, a friend of my father's told my parents to go on ahead without me, and I was going to stay there at church with him. I didn't even barely know this man, and I thought he must be crazy. My dad looked worried, knowing that it was highly probable this could end confrontational and ugly. By this time in my life, it was very clear that nobody told me what to do. But for some reason, I said it was okay, and I stayed with Tom. As we talked there in front of the empty church, I told him that I had started a record company and was using my money to put out music CDs. He was bold and showed no fear talking with me. That was something I could smell from a mile away, and I respected that. He explained to me that my ship was sinking like the Titanic, so I could rearrange my life like I was rearranging deck chairs on a doomed ship, but no matter what, the boat was sinking and I was going down. Well, later in his car, that little fearless man led me to Christ. The next day, he drove me to Sisters and we parked in a field. He said, "You see those mountains pointing to the snow-covered Cascades? That's how God views your life now. You've been washed as clean as that snow in his eyes." Now, unlike what Hollywood tells us, most changes don't just happen all at once. I left there with new energy, but I also left there back into my old world that was still waiting for me. I'd like to tell you I was strong and gave everything up at once, but I didn't. It just wasn't that easy, and I liked easy. I backslid and still attempted to rearrange the deck chairs of my life. I tried leaving the world of prostitution only to go back into a life of selling drugs. I figured it wasn't really hurting anybody that way. It was the lesser of 2 evils in my mind. I was still drinking myself to death, and each afternoon I'd wake up, stumble to the bathroom, throw up until I was dry heaving, then stumble back to bed and lay in my sweat shaking for another few hours. I thought of God and I thought of the Titanic, but I pushed those thoughts to the back of my head. I used most of my energy trying to reconstruct the night before, and I always wondered what had taken place. But one morning, after throwing up and stumbling back to bed, I gave up. I was so angry and I prayed to God. Laying face down on my pillow, I yelled at him. I said, "God, I give up. I can't quit drinking. And I know it's killing me, but I can't do anything about it. I'm gonna die from this, and the joke's gonna be on you, because I'll have done nothing with my life. I'm not even gonna attempt to make a go at it. I can't meet you halfway. I can't give it my best. I can't do anything. I give up." And flippantly, I said, "If you wanted me to be sober, you do it yourself. I quit trying. There's gonna be no help from me." I imagine God laughed at that, thinking, "You silly fool. There was never anything you could do without me." And at that moment, I fell into a deep sleep. I woke sober, no hangover, no dry mouth, nothing. He picked up my alcoholism and he lifted it off my shoulders single-handedly. To everyone's shock and awe around me, I didn't touch a drop of alcohol again. I was sober for real. I still sold dope, I bought a BMW, saved a lot more money, and got into a lot less fights. Life seemed really good for a while, but friends of mine kept dying, murders, suicides, the same story. I still carried my pistol with me and constantly looked over my shoulder. After 2 years of being sober, but still caught up in the game, I was living by myself on a big farm in the middle of Northern California's marijuana growing country. I was alone by myself in a trailer with an AK-47 and all the weed I could smoke. I'd sit there looking at the trees, and I began to look at my life for what it was. In the peace of the forest and the wilderness, God began to speak to me. It was clear as a bell. He said, "Todd, I protected you against all odds, and it's time you leave the game and everything you have in life and follow me." Now that's not what I wanted to hear from God. I was close to making a lot of money that year from a lot of different hustles I had going. The urban music industry's biggest magazine was publishing a story about me that very month. It would be worldwide exposure to the fact that I was a known Caucasian pimp in a predominantly black urban music industry who had just released a big album. This wasn't the time to be changing. I said, "God, I don't want to change. Come on, you know me. My heart's hard and I'm happy with that. I got a real stomach for this violence and drama and pain. You know this." And God said, "Todd, I've carried your alcoholism on my shoulders for 2 years without any help from you. You don't think I can soften your heart?" Well, he had me. It was just like playing poker and he had a full house. So I saw it was logic I couldn't argue with, and I told him, "Okay, I'll leave all the cars, clothes, everything, but after the season's over, I got obligations." A month later, I was there on my hands and knees, not to pray, but to be arrested for ex-con and possession of a firearm and the suspicion of murdering my neighbor. After God had spoken to me in the wilderness, I felt calm. Even as the homicide detectives went rounds with me, playing good cop, bad cop, I had a sense of peace. In the holding cell, I prayed to Jesus. "God, if this is your will for me, so be it. I just ask that you'll be with me and protect me. I didn't kill that man, but as you know, I'm guilty of other things just as bad." See, I had conspired and had a head full of information on other murders that were unsolved. So I thought, well, I think I might be reaping what I sow. But I wasn't angry, and I accepted my fate as being in God's hands now, wherever that may lead me. For the second time in my life, the first being my alcoholism, I surrendered it all to God. And within an hour, I had made a $50,000 bail bond and was standing outside of the jail looking back at it in bewilderment. All the money I had procrastinated on God for, it went to the best criminal defense lawyer available, and I beat the entire case. Then God spoke again. He said, "All right, now follow me, Todd. I'm going to change you, and you will never go back to prison again. You will be free." So I left California and I came back home. I humbled myself and I went to stay with my parents at the age of 31. They greeted me with open arms and poured God's love in my life. The man who had led me to Christ asked me to come to his men's group. I went, though the enemy was putting up a tug of war for my soul. I had been plagued with the worst unspeakable nightmare terrors I had ever had. I would murder members of my family and friends each night as soon as I fell asleep. And it was so graphically real that I would awaken with my heart beating out of my chest, mortified that I had really killed my family while I was sleeping. It was only when I heard their footsteps and voices through the walls that I would breathe a sigh of relief and know they were still alive. In groups surrounded by men who I thought couldn't possibly have anything in common with me, I shared my story, including the fact that the devil was terrorizing me to a point of near insanity. I wasn't sure trying to be a Christian was going to be the right call for me. But these men who fancy themselves as a fighting band of brothers came to my parents' house, led by Tom, and waged battle in the unseen world. They laid hands on me, they prayed, they read scripture, they anointed me and the room with oil, and they had me renounce any and all strongholds that Satan had in my life, all the way down to the tattoos symbolic of murder and death that cover my body. Well, it worked. The dreams were gone. Satan was gone from my sleep. It was a healing and it was a miracle. That was a year ago. And since then, God has continued to work in my life. He's performed countless other miracles, true to his words in the wilderness. He softened my heart and he restored my relationship with my family. And through his grace, he showed me that I can forgive myself too, just as he already has. Today I follow what our group calls the three-legged stool, 3 legs that must be used at the same time in order to create perfect balance. 1, prayer. 2, reading his word. And 3 is fellowshipping with other believers. Now in AA they say, keep coming back, it works. Unfortunately, I don't know if statistics back them up on that, but I can tell you this, Jesus works. That's a fact. I share this with my friends still in prison and tell them about hope and about how Jesus is all that matters. Even my friend Travis on death row now says, if God can change Todd, he can change anybody. See, I don't even deserve credit for a supporting role in God's story. I didn't do anything but cause pain and make a big mess. This is all about Jesus. Believe you me, when I run the show, things get real ugly. Only, and I repeat only, is it through the blood and grace of Jesus Christ that I'm here today. When I first decided to walk with God and really walk this out, the most important tool that I had was the men's group that I became involved with, especially the transition when I was coming from a bad place and coming in to try and walk with God and do the right thing. And if you're out there and you're serious about wanting to walk with Christ, you know, stay in the Word, read your Bible, pray, and be in fellowship with other men, be in fellowship with believers. And it's important to have other men that can hold you accountable for your decisions and say, hold on now, this isn't right what you're doing, or you're slipping here. And I think all men suffer with a lot of the same issues with, for instance, pride, lust, greed, and anger. We all suffer that, regardless what walk of life we come from. It's an essential, important part of my week and my life now. And if you're out there and you're beginning to walk with Christ, I just can't stress enough how important it is to get involved with a group of believers. And us as men, being men, we need to be in fellowship with other men. It's one of the key elements that just lit the fire under my faith. And maybe, hey, this is for me. This is all out, 100% go, you know. I encourage anyone out there to get involved with men and walk this out together. You know, this is tough, and you wouldn't go into battle by yourself, so get a team around you, get armored up. It's difficult to do this alone. In fact, I think it's impossible to do this alone.
Da skal vi få litt mer musikk her, og vi har allerede 3 mennesker som har blitt frelst her I kveld. Og Todd G, you have a great testimony how the Lord delivered you. Can you tell a little bit about your background?
Before the empire could strike back, I left the track with the guns blazing. Nothing to prove with the groove, there's still one nation. I'm facing the facts, I lost a little time, but now I'm back on the map with a rhyme. You see the shine, it ain't no bling bling. Nah, it's a king thing and much props.
Was you a rapper before?
Yes, I've been a rapper since I was younger. Once my life, I began to get grounded with my roots in God. He gave that back to me and said, do this, but do this for me now. I flip the script, but don't credit me on the album cover. Chocolates went up to Jesus. I'm not even trying to get discovered. The hustlers, pimps, they know me. That was the homies. I write this for the cats in the streets and follow what God told me. I got that work like a D-boy. You search long enough, now it's what? It's Todd G, boy. This right here is my theme song. When I was your age, a lot of people would tell me, don't do drugs, don't drink alcohol, don't go shoot people, don't do these things that I had been a part of in my whole life. But see, everybody that had told me that had never done that before.
You know, the kids want to be like that. They see these guys.
And I won't preach to you or get into a whole lot of details about this either, but I had an encounter with God, and I felt God in my heart telling me to leave this lifestyle. Check my watch and it's time for a miracle. Cause even my rich ballin' homeboys in the game are still miserable. For real, I kneel before God and pray this. Lord, protect us from ourselves cause we living with so much hatred. I didn't graduate from high school, so bear with me. I'll just give it up to God, know Jesus there with me. I'm a sinner.
So, what do you have to say to people that don't know Jesus? That maybe are in the same situation as you? was.
For instance, viewers and people that aren't Christians can know is when they look at, like, for example, my life story, is that Jesus loves us. It doesn't matter what we've done. No matter how bad you think your past is, believe me, I've been there and I know that, but you know, Jesus loves us nonetheless.
I understand it. God, I got the Red Sea in front of me. He said, I understand all that. Stretch.
This is my time. You understand me? It don't matter.
And so I began to make music with my testimony for Jesus, and I began to see God's calling for my life, which was to bring him to the lost and share God with others and non-believers who don't know him.
Back on the map with a pay attention, this is God's time. That was what? It's Todd G, boy. Do I deserve it? I think not, but I'm back on top.
Good versus evil, God versus the devil. What side you on?
Tusen takk for at du ville ha oss.
Gud velsigne dere, gutter. Stå på. Og i jernet, eller rapp folk inn i himmelen.
I wish you could hear what I hear in my head. Oh, you don't give me, you don't hear that.
Amen. Da skal vi få litt mer musikk her, og vi har allerede 3 mennesker som har...
Guerrilla Gospel Motorcycle Club. We built this club as a brotherhood for guys like us who primarily are coming out of a life of crime in the penitentiary system. Coming out of prison, there wasn't a lot of support for some of these men, and so we designed a club of like-minded guys that would hold each other accountable and build each other up, not unsimilar to the early church in Acts. We would meet guys where they are, and we would lead by example, and we'd hope that our behaviors and our actions would speak louder than words and preaching would. I knew early on this wasn't going to be pretty, it wasn't going to be warm and fuzzy, and it was going to be rough, and that was okay. I felt that's what God called me to do and to create, and that's what we did, and I was right. Sometimes it isn't, but early on what we realized also is that these guys wanted to help people, and I looked at it as like we're helping each other by being a part of this club, and like I say, early on guys said, you know, we want to help others, we want to do programs, we want to do outreach, and I thought it was kind of funny. And being democratic, we vote on everything, and sure enough, from the very beginning, we're voting in outreach ministry ideas, nonprofit charity stuff, and nonprofit charity events. As these programs got underway, I watched the guys, and I watched it. The more they helped others, the more they took ownership in that, the more it became part of their identity to be guys that were helping, guys that were giving back. The more media coverage we got saying that, you know, we were now the good guys, it made guys start to embody the things that are characteristic of the good guys. You got to understand, most of us have spent the greater portions of our lives being known as the bad guys, being known as the guys that hurt people. That was all part of our identity, and our identities were wrapped up within that. So to watch this change in and of itself is not only a miracle, it's unbelievable. It's the greatest thing that God has allowed me to be a part of in my life to this day. Brains over chains. Promoting education over incarceration. This is the brainchild of one of our guys, Lorenzo. He came up with this. He's got a passion for reading and a passion for books. And one of our other members, one of my best friends, Tony, had just came home after serving 10 years in the penitentiary. He actually said that, you know, they don't have very many books out in Umatilla at Two Rivers Prison. So we could maybe get a program together, ask the public to donate books, and then we would deliver them out to the prison. So I said, great, you know, good idea. And we voted it in, and we ran with it. It was kind of Lorenzo's brainchild, and so the Eugene chapter over in Eugene, Oregon, they kind of ran with it and got everything set up for it. So for 2 months, we asked the public to donate any and all used books, new or used, any kind of books. The prison said they'd take whatever that we could bring them. And so we did that. And at the end of the little run, we ended up with 10,000 books. And I think the prison was even surprised when we pulled up with big 4x4 trucks and U-Haul trailers and Tahoe and packed to the rim with books. And we delivered them. This program is now our flagship program. It's something we feel real strongly about, and it's something that we're going forward with full force. We have a vision and a dream in the future to have enough books to be able to supply any prison in the country that needs books. We'd like for a prison to call us, you name it, in a different state and say, hey, we need books here. And we'd say, great, how many? And we'll ship them to you. That's the overall vision for this particular program, and it's something that's very doable. We want the public to get involved with us again. We're doing Brains Over Chains 2. We'd love to get any and all books that we can, books that are sitting around in people's attics, garages, whatever. They'll take them. Believe me, books that you think maybe aren't worth anything are worth the world to an inmate sitting in prison who can use them to educate themselves and to make themselves better. We have a heart for inmates and people in the system. We've been there ourselves. We understand it. We also understand that a lot of the world maybe doesn't have that same feeling, same thing put on their heart for inmates. Here's the deal, though. What we believe is that even if you don't support inmates or believe in inmates, lock them up, throw away the key, that's fine. But here's the reality. People go to the penitentiary, they come home. That's a fact. Recidivism is super high. That means people are going to prison, they're coming home, they're going back to prison. This is a cycle. It's going over and over again. Now, your neighbors, your daughters, your kids, your sons, people are going to be victims of crime. That's a reality. So what we want to do is we want the public that maybe doesn't have the same heart with us, understand, help us, help you, help the community, help it become a safer place by educating guys that technically are the guys that will be coming home and committing more crimes and causing more victims and creating the world to be a less safe place than it is already. Okay, so we're asking that the community will get involved and help us. Why us? Why Guerrilla Gospel Motorcycle Club? Well, we look at it like this. Why not us? Who better? Who better to help these guys, and who better to get involved with trying to make the world a better place than these guys that were the wrongdoers, these guys that were these men that were making the world so much of a more dangerous place and a worse place for the greater portions of their lives. Okay, we understand it. We've been there. We also know what it's like to change. In America, the rate of recidivism and guys going back to prison is very, very high, alarmingly high, like 70 to 80 percentile, depending on where you look. However, I know one place where recidivism is non-existent. That's Guerrilla Gospel Motorcycle Club, okay? Now, we've spent the last 3 years with a whole bunch of ex-cons, a big group of guys here. We got them in Eugene, we got them in Bend. None of our guys have gone back to the county jail or to the prison system. Not one.
Cats fall, cats make mistakes. Sometimes this past catches up with you, you know what I mean? It's like, what I always say is the game is the gift that keeps on giving. So we had to build a brotherhood of support for guys like us. Again, we had to build something that was strong, something that guys could say, I'm going to go be around these guys because that makes me feel good to be part of a brotherhood that's about something that matters, you know what I mean? And that's kind of the core basis of the Guerrilla Gospel Motorcycle Club. Hey, when you're ready to walk it out, come with us. The game was full of drama and excitement. The shootings, promoting prostitution, whatever. But now we about doing the right thing and a little more peace in that. And a whole lot of excitement still going on, but this time we ain't going to jail for it. This time we're helping do better and changing lives, and that's what we're about. That's the biz. Guerrilla Gospel, man.